What if I told you there was a secret vault hidden inside the White House, and no one knew about it until now? This isn't just any ordinary room. This is a sealed-off compartment with no official records, no cameras, a veritable black hole in the heart of the seat of American power. The kind of place where world-changing decisions could be archived or buried forever. Now think about it. Why would a president need something like that? The White House has always been a symbol of power, tradition, and mystery. And when Donald Trump's name enters the equation, everything takes on an even more enigmatic tone. During his term, structural changes were made to several areas of the building. Some, according to public records, others, not so much. Did you know that part of the original floor plan of the West Wing disappeared from the digital archives in 2018? Coincidence? It could be. But anyone who works in political investigation has already learned. In Washington, coincidences are almost never just coincidences. Some say that the vault does exist and was built under direct orders from the then president, a structure with limited access outside of standard surveillance systems, supposedly used to store documents that should never fall into anyone's hands, not even the next government. Classified information, secret agreements, evidence of alliances that contradict public statements. What could be stored inside? Have you ever wondered what a president would do to keep certain secrets under lock and key? Or better yet, what he would be afraid of the world finding out about? During the investigation into the classified documents taken to Mar-a-Lago, whispers about this vault emerged. Officials who wished to remain anonymous spoke of a room with no name, a reinforced door at the back of the presidential library, no official records, no cameras, no list of who came or went. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover now may surprise you. A lot. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton has hinted in interviews that some of Trump's orders were not covered. Mike Pence, in a moment of obvious discomfort, deflected questions about documents kept in private settings within the White House. What exactly are they avoiding saying? And further, why has the FBI, which has exhaustively investigated classified files stored outside the White House, never spoken out about this possible hidden room? Could we be facing an even bigger secret? A secret so explosive that not even official bodies dare touch it? Perhaps the most disturbing question is not, what's in the safe? But yes, why does it exist? When a political leader creates a space that is inaccessible even to his own allies, it is a sign that the content stored there may be much more than paper and ink. And at this point in the story, all we have are scattered pieces, truncated testimonies, erased records, and a deafening silence from the authorities. But there is a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs that is beginning to reveal itself, and you are about to follow that trail with me. Because what comes next could completely change what you think about power, secrecy, and the real reason a secret vault was built inside the White House. Of course, much is still shrouded in fog, but sometimes it is precisely the silences, the things no one mentions, that scream the loudest. The existence of this safe, its possible connections to secret documents, shady deals, and internal movements, all of this points to something that has not yet fully come to light, and perhaps never will, unless we keep asking questions, unless more voices are raised. That's why, if this topic makes sense to you, if this type of mystery also worries you like it does me, leave here in the comments what caught your attention the most so far. Do you believe that this safe really exists? What do you think might be hidden inside? Your opinion may pull a new thread, open new questions, and even inspire future videos. And look, if this content has kept you engaged so far, leave a like now, because this really helps the video reach more people who, like you, also want to understand what is being hidden behind the curtains of power. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe. Seriously. Your presence here is what gives us the strength to continue digging, researching, and bringing to light these stories that many people prefer to keep in the dark. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content. It's not just numbers, it's community. It's people who care, People who feel that shiver when they realize something isn't right and decide to go beyond the surface. Now hold on tight, because what comes next could completely change what you thought you knew about what went on behind the scenes of the most controversial presidency in decades. But where exactly could this safe be? Where is such a delicate structure hidden in the middle of the most guarded building in the world, without anyone noticing? The answer, like almost everything that involves the backstage of power, lies between the lines, or rather, in the erased layers of a map. A set of architectural plans for the West Wing of the White House, dated 2014, showed a standard layout, with corridors, meeting rooms, offices, and technical spaces very well defined. Nothing there seemed out of place. Everything followed the logic of a maximum security building. But it was only when comparing these plans with internal records obtained by journalists during the Trump administration that something unusual caught our attention. Between 2019 and 2020, some of these plans were changed. Not publicly, of course, not as an official reform with a press release or details released to the public, but through confidential contracts signed with engineering companies with a history of providing services in military areas and industrial secrets. The kind of companies that do not release press releases, that do not comment on projects, that sign confidentiality clauses with fine print and guaranteed silence. In these new plans, the south wing of the presidential library appears to have changed slightly, in proportion. A corridor that previously provided access to a technical storage room has been extended a few meters beyond what the external structure would allow. It's not something that is blatant. No one who looked at it superficially would notice. But, for those who understand architecture, physical space, and proportion, it doesn't make sense. It's as if someone had stretched a room that couldn't grow, as if a space had appeared between the walls. But no one had declared the construction of this space. From then on, everything starts to fall into place in a strange way. Former employees report nighttime movements of workers who entered without badges and did not cross the conventional corridors. Maintenance technicians saying they were prohibited from making adjustments in that area without direct authorization. Lights turned on at unusual times. Sensors turned off for a few minutes, as if something needed to be done far from any record. These are small details, but they form a pattern. A pattern that points to the existence of something hidden, built to be forgotten by everyone, except for a single person. And here comes one of the most delicate questions in this whole story. The impact of this on national security. Because if there is a room that is not in the records, it means that anything could be stored there. Not just documents, but equipment, devices, recordings, artifacts delivered by international agents. The idea of a space within the White House that does not officially belong to the government is in itself a strategic risk. Because what is not mapped is not protected either. And what is not protected can become vulnerable, or be used to compromise everything around it. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because when we start to understand the physical structure of power as part of the political narrative itself, everything changes. It's not just about walls and concrete. It's about intention. It's about mindset. Why would someone change the floor plan of the White House without publicity? What kind of decision does this level of secrecy require? What needs to be guarded so absolutely, so hidden, that it can't even appear on a map? It's as if this space wasn't just a safe. It was a symbol. A reflection of how Trump saw his own relationship with the office of president. For many, he never saw the presidency as a job, but as an possession. Something he could shape according to his own criteria. A power that bent to his will, and this was manifested not only in his speeches, in his public attitudes, but even in his physical structures. Creating a secret space is, in the end, a way of marking territory, of asserting control, of building a kingdom within a system that should be democratic, but that, at times, seemed to orbit him as if it were an extension of his private company. But it doesn't stop there. Other versions of these plans, which would have been given to third-party engineers, show wall thicknesses well above normal in the same altered region. Double wall with acoustic insulation system. Reinforced steel door. Internal concrete layer. Everything indicates that the space was built to resist, and to keep what is inside isolated not only from sound, but from any attempt at external listening. It is a level of armor that is normally only found in military installations or high-end bank vaults. And yet it was erected within the seat of the United States executive branch. Some say that the safe is no longer there, that it was dismantled in the last days of the term, that everything was removed and transferred to another location. But, if this is true, why does the structure remain unchanged? Why has the new government never spoken out about the changes? And most importantly, why has no one, absolutely no one, officially confirmed what the technical records suggest? This kind of silence says more than 1,000 words. Because if there is fear of addressing the issue, it is because the issue has weight. And if the issue has weight, it is because what is at stake is not just concrete and steel. It is truth. A hidden truth. An essential piece of a much larger puzzle involving high-impact decisions, international relations, and a very specific way of exercising power. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you are also seeing this pattern, if you have also noticed that some structures were made to hide more than to protect. Because now comes the most delicate part of this story. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because someone would create a secret vault in the nerve center of world power says a lot more about the command mentality than about the objects locked inside. A safe is not born by chance, it is born of necessity. A silent decision that says, without words, this cannot be seen. And when this decision comes from a president, everything changes proportions. Let's consider the context. Trump has always been someone who defied protocol. This is neither a criticism nor a compliment, it's a fact. From his first day in office, he made it clear that he would shape his office to his way of seeing the world. And within this logic, a safe, an absolutely restricted space, with no official records, no external control, becomes almost a symbolic extension of his own administration. A place where the boundaries between what is public and what is personal blur without ceremony. There are many theories surrounding this safe, and all of them in some way make sense when you look at the history of decisions taken over the 4 years of his term. The most common one is about highly confidential documents, files that, by law, should have been registered in the National Archives at the end of his presidency, but which, by all indications, were not. Perhaps because they exposed informal alliances, perhaps because they revealed political strategies that needed to be kept under the radar, or perhaps because they compromised figures who are still actively involved in international politics. But there is something deeper here, a detail that goes unnoticed by those who see this story as just a political dispute. We are talking about a president who at various times demonstrated distrust not only of his adversaries, but of the very system that surrounded him. Intelligence agencies, the press, advisors, all were, at some point, targets of his public distrust. And when someone operates with this level of distrust, the desire to keep their own truths hidden becomes almost inevitable. The safe, in this case, would not be just a shelter for documents, but a shield against the system itself. Now imagine what kind of content would justify this level of control. One theory that has gained traction in alternative investigation circles is that the safe housed internal recordings, not only of presidential meetings, but of conversations held at times of high diplomatic tension. Records that could, if exposed, alter the course of agreements with other nations. Another theory speaks of reports delivered by foreign informants, people inside rival governments who, for strategic convenience, maintained direct lines to the presidential office. And some say that there was evidence of negotiations with private corporations to shape internal political decisions, a type of alliance that, if it came to light, would call into question not only the legality of certain decrees, but the very integrity of institutional democracy. This would explain why, even after the end of the mandate, no authority has officially touched on the subject. Perhaps because the content represents a risk of global impact. Or perhaps because those who know the details understand that silence is the only way to keep the system breathing. But there is an even more symbolic layer to all this. The safe can represent a limit, a point where the public figure becomes a private figure, where the man stops being president and goes back to being a businessman, strategist, and architect of his own game, a space where the records do not belong to the state, but to him. because in his view, certain elements of the presidency did not belong to the American people. They belonged to him. And this way of thinking completely transforms what we understand as power. And if this safe was really used in this way, then it becomes an object of historical value, not only for what it holds, but for what it represents. A symbol of the transition from transparent power to shielded power, from dialogue to secrecy, from functional democracy to administration under codes and seals. It is as if the existence of this safe showed, in a brutally clear way, that there are two versions of the truth, the one that is told, and the one that is kept. And this is where the story takes on an even more complex tone. Because one of the most uncomfortable theories of all does not speak of documents or recordings, but of personal pacts, commitments made outside formal channels, oaths of loyalty to figures who, if mentioned, would jeopardize not only the reputation of a president, but the stability of entire international alliances. There are names that cannot be written down, flights that cannot be traced, calls that cannot be recorded. And if this evidence exists, would it be on some server? No. It would be exactly where no one would think to look, inside a physical structure, with no external connection, with no risk of digital interception. This theory has been gaining traction for a very simple reason. During the government, there have been at least 4 occasions when important decisions were made without any official record of the meeting. No public agenda, no minutes, just the result. And what do all these events have in common? The involvement of international figures, trillion-dollar deals, and reactions that have not been fully explained to this day. Coincidence or not, all these decisions coincide with the period when, according to internal sources, the secret room began to be used with increasing frequency. Write in the comments. The truth is uncomfortable if you also realize that certain questions remain unanswered, not because they are difficult, but because they are dangerous. Because when power decides to protect itself behind a steel door, it's because what's inside can shake everything outside. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was precisely at the moment when the spotlight left the White House and turned to Mar-a-Lago that the story of this safe returned with more force than ever. The transition of power did not erase the tracks. On the contrary, it illuminated paths that were previously hidden. And it was during this change of command that the first connections between the secret safe and the confidential documents found in Trump's personal residence in Florida began to emerge. When the FBI conducted its raid on Mar-a-Lago, what was uncovered was more than surprising. It was eye-opening. Folders marked top secret, notes from private meetings, even classified material that should never have left the national intelligence community. That was scandalous enough, but the real shock came when investigators began to ask, where exactly did these documents come from? When did they leave the White House? And most importantly, why was there no record of their movement? This is where the mystery of the secret vault takes on another dimension, because according to 2 sources close to the investigation, there was an internal list, never disclosed, of materials that know they were in the official database of the National Archives, documents that, theoretically, had never even been cataloged, but that mysteriously appeared in the batch seized at Mar-a-Lago. The only plausible explanation for this is that these files never went through the regular outgoing channels. They were not removed from a common room. They were not registered by any assistant. They were stored somewhere out of reach, away from the eyes of the transitional administration. And if you've connected the dots this far, you already know where all this leads. The safe, the room without a map, the space built in absolute silence. If this place really existed, and the evidence keeps pointing to it, then it becomes the most logical origin for what the world only discovered after the former president's departure. It is as if that safe had functioned as a portal, the last stop for the most sensitive documents before they disappeared from the radar. And there's more. During the investigation into the Mar-a-Lago incident, references emerged to a strange pattern of internal movements in the final months of the Trump administration. Officials reported that sealed boxes began to be transported at unusual times, often by unusual crews. Interestingly, none of these shipments appeared in the White House logistics reports. It was as if someone was emptying an entire room without leaving a trace. These movements coincide with the period in which the library area, precisely where the entrance to the vault is believed to be, was closed for emergency renovations. But the most disturbing thing is not the closure itself. It is the fact that the library's permanent employees were temporarily reassigned without explanation. This is not normal, even more so when it comes to an environment that deals with historical documents and sensitive materials. The question that many began to ask behind the scenes was, what kind of renovation requires so much secrecy and urgency in the last days of an administration? It is important to remember that the Mar-a-Lago incident did not happen in a vacuum. It was the result of a long chain of decisions, and the existence of this vault, or at least a similar structure, helps to piece together this puzzle. Because if there were documents inside that were not officially registered, then the governance process itself was operating on a parallel layer. A government within a government. A flow of information that did not obey conventional rules, but rather a logic of absolute control. And that's when we start to see the true impact of all this. Because the problem isn't just the content of the documents, it's the system that allowed them to be treated as personal property. It's the structure that, instead of protecting the public interest, has become hostage to private decisions. A secret safe is not just a physical place, it's a symbol of a mindset that refuses to be accountable, a direct reflection of the transformation of public office into a silent and impenetrable instrument of power. But there is another detail that almost went unnoticed. The files seized at Mar-a-Lago contained access codes to federal servers that should have been deactivated at the time of the government transition. The presence of these codes in a private residence is a very high risk, and it raises another question. Who had access to them in the last few days? Where was this data stored before it was taken? Some analysts believe that it was protected in physical format, without a network connection, precisely to avoid tracking. If this is true, it further reinforces the idea that the safe was used as a strategic storage point before the materials were removed. And when you look at the pattern of investigations, it becomes clear that there is enormous fear on the part of the authorities in delving deeper into this line of investigation. Not because it is not valid, but because it leads to places that are too sensitive, names that should not appear, documents that cannot be authenticated, decisions that, if revealed, could compromise global alliances, diplomatic structures, and even the country's own image of institutional neutrality. So while the eyes of the world were on the cardboard boxes at Mar-a-Lago, the real secret may have been the lack of questions about what was left behind, about what was never seen, never recorded, but which left a shadow, thick, heavy, over everything that came after. Comment here. Everything begins in silence. If you also feel like the pieces are slowly falling into place, but with a precision that is impossible to ignore. Because now, more than ever, it is time to take a close look at what no one wants to say out loud. Now that the dust has begun to settle, it is impossible to ignore the uncomfortable silence coming from those who were closest to power. Because if there is a thread that ties together all the points we have raised so far, it passes through those who lived behind the scenes, sat in on confidential meetings, signed decrees, participated in conversations that never reached the public, but that left traces. And it is precisely these former allies, strategic figures in the Trump administration, who have begun to emit signals that sound more like warnings than comments. John Bolton, the former national security advisor, was one of the first to let slip fragments of a story that seems much bigger than the cameras could capture. In an interview broadcast months after the Mar-a-Lago scandal, he said that some things are just not meant to be archived. A loose phrase, delivered with disconcerting ease, but one that carries immense weight. Because when one of the most informed men in American foreign policy says this, he is not talking about personal notes or drafts. He is talking about strategic decisions, about operations, about agreements that, for some reason, needed to disappear from the institutional timeline. Former Vice President Mike Pence has also avoided any direct mention of the vault, but in his public statements and depositions, he has shown clear discomfort when asked about the flow of classified documents within the White House. At a press conference, When asked about the fate of certain national security reports that had disappeared from official records, he responded with a phrase that was as calculated as it was enigmatic. "I would prefer not to comment on files that were above my level of access." What is striking here is not the answer itself, but the fact that as vice president, Pence had access to virtually everything, except perhaps what was stored in the vault, outside of the system. That which was locked away somewhere that was not included in the traditional government structures, and it doesn't stop there. One of Trump's former lawyers, who worked directly on the presidential transition and on the management of sensitive documents, stated in a confidential deposition that there was an area that not even the legal team was allowed to enter. Once again, no explicit confirmation of the safe. But the construction is always the same. There is a space, a place, a layer of the government that operated separately, and this pattern is not repeated by chance. These reports, although fragmented, reveal more to us than one might imagine at first glance. They don't give away the details, and that's exactly what makes them so revealing. When someone who has had access to the heart of power chooses his words so carefully, when he avoids specific names, dates, and places, it is not because he does not know. It's because you know too much. And he knows that certain information, when exposed in a raw way, has an impact that goes beyond the political. It enters the institutional, diplomatic, and even legal spheres. The most curious thing is that, even with Trump's departure from the presidency, these former allies continue to protect each other with an undeclared pact of silence. None of them openly denies the accusations. None of them says that the safe is purely made up. On the contrary, what they do is always leave a gap, an ambiguity, a sentence cut in half. That's none of my business here. It's not up to me to comment there. This orchestrated hesitation is what fuels the certainty that there is something real and dangerous behind this story. Now, what does this tell us about the way power was being wielded? It tells us that there was a command mentality based on extreme compartmentalization. Each person had a slice of the truth. No one saw the whole. And this type of structure serves only one purpose: to protect the decision-making center from any interference. The safe in this scenario is not just a physical space. It is a symbol of inaccessible, shielded power, deliberately isolated from the very structure that is supposed to regulate it. And it's not just about protecting information. It's about protecting decisions. It's about hiding motivations. It's about archiving intentions that, if revealed, would call into question not only a government, but the very notion of democratic transparency. Because the real secret is rarely the content of a document. The real secret is why that content needed to be hidden. When central figures like Bolton, Pence, and others choose not to speak, they are saying something with their silence. They are signaling that there are consequences to breaking that barrier, that there are risks to exposing certain layers of power, that not everything can be said, and may never be. But when you put together what was said and what was left out, what emerges is a frighteningly consistent narrative. And that consistency is what makes it all the more intriguing. Because it comes from sources who have been in the eye of the storm. People who have nothing to gain from keeping a story alive, except that maybe it's not over yet. Maybe it's just waiting for the right moment to fully emerge. Write in the comments. Silence also speaks. If you also feel that these subtexts are saying more than any official statement could reveal. Because there are things that don't need to be said in so many words for us to understand exactly what is happening. If all the pieces of this story are beginning to fall into place, there is one that remains shrouded in even thicker fog: the FBI's stance. Because from the very beginning, when the first rumors about the secret vault began to circulate, an almost choreographed silence took over the federal agencies. And we're not just talking about omission, we're talking about an active absence, a deliberate choice not to address the issue. Which raises an inevitable question. Why has the FBI, one of the most powerful and informed institutions on the planet, never spoken publicly about the possibility of this vault's existence? This is where the game changes completely. Because up until now we have been talking about suspicious movements, altered blueprints, ambiguous statements, and missing documents. But the moment the FBI enters, or rather, does not enter, into the equation, it turns on a red light about the depth of this network. If the safe exists, as so much evidence suggests, the FBI knows about it. It's that simple. They have resources, informants, access to thermal imaging, construction, records, confidential contracts. They knew about internal movements in the White House even before the press did. So the fact that they never admitted, denied, or even hinted at the existence of this room is, in itself, revealing. And here comes a new level of interpretation. That of institutional power collapsing in the face of something greater. The FBI is an autonomous agency, yes, but it is also made up of people. And people, no matter how trained, know when they are dealing with something that goes beyond the bounds of simple investigation. Maybe the safe isn't just a safe. Perhaps it is connected to a set of decisions and relationships that, if revealed, would put the very credibility of the federal structure at risk. Not because the FBI was complicit, but because it was kept out, or why he was forced to observe without acting. Now I want to take you even deeper into this line of thought. Let's imagine the following situation. A room is built inside the White House, off the official records. Staff are relocated, blueprints are altered, documents disappear. 4 years later, these documents reappear at Mar-a-Lago. The FBI is called in, searches are carried out, and finds compromising material, but never mentions the real origin of the files. Wouldn't it be natural that during an operation of this size, the place of origin would be one of the main lines of investigation? But it wasn't. No public report touched on this point. No press conference even suggested that some of the documents might have been taken from an unknown room. And here, the lack of mention is not negligence. It is shielding. It is strategic silence. And when silence is adopted by an institution that thrives on revelation, it is because there is something big enough to justify this restraint. Something that perhaps involves more than documents. Perhaps it involves the very model of control, of power. It is no exaggeration to think that there is indeed a much larger game of influence taking place behind the scenes, because what is at issue is not just what was kept in the vault, but why no one can talk about it, and most importantly, who has the power to maintain this silence. There is a chain of invisible decisions where certain names are not mentioned, certain doors are not opened, certain matters are not recorded. This is more than secrecy. It's a narrative protection system. A parallel layer where the real is not what happened, but what the public can be allowed to know. In practical terms, this means that the vault may have become a focal point for politics, national security, and interests that go beyond the borders of the country itself. Companies, foreign leaders, billion-dollar contracts, all of this revolving around decisions made in the dark. Decisions that cannot be documented, much less explained. Which ultimately puts the FBI in a delicate position. To investigate would risk destabilizing the very system it was created to protect. And this opens the door to a theory that is already beginning to circulate more frequently among experts and investigative journalists, that the vault may have been an architectural response to the collapse of trust, not only between Trump and his adversaries, but between him and the institutions themselves. When you distrust the CIA, the NSA, Congress, the media, the judiciary, all that's left is to build a space where only you have the key. A refuge of absolute control. A symbolic bunker against what is understood as the enemy within. But this type of construction has a cost, because by creating a space that is beyond everyone's reach, you also create a point of structural fragility. A kind of black hole within the system, where information enters but does not leave, where decisions are made without registration, and where power comes into existence not because it was granted, but because it was taken. It is a profound transformation in the logic of command. The president ceases to be the representative and becomes the guardian of truths that no one else can access. And that is why, even in the face of so many signs, the FBI remains silent, because breaking this barrier would mean rewriting part of recent history. Reveal a management model where the state was used as a shield and a hiding place at the same time, where the secret became a method, and where the only way to preserve order was to never allow certain doors to be opened. Comment. Here. There's something that doesn't close, if you also feel that behind every silence. There is a truth waiting to be revealed, because sometimes what is not said has an even greater impact than any confession. Now I want to explore this question even deeper, because after everything we have already gathered, the hidden signs, the uncomfortable silences, the erased traces, the question that begins to pulsate at the center of the narrative is simple, but explosive. What, after all, could be kept inside that safe? We're not talking about old papers or personal mementos. The scale of this building, with reinforced walls, soundproofing, and restricted access even for high-ranking officials, reveals that the contents inside were not only important, they were sensitive enough to warrant a hiding place within, the seat of world power. And it's on this scale that the hypotheses come to life. The first and most talked about among internal sources are the letters exchanged between Trump and foreign leaders. Some of these correspondences have already come to light, such as the messages exchanged with Kim Jong-un, partially revealed to the press. But the theory is that what was disclosed was only the protocol part. The rest, what really matters, would have remained under absolute secrecy. Imagine handwritten letters, with promises or negotiations that completely deviated from the official discourse. Direct commitments between heads of state, outside the traditional diplomatic channels. This, if confirmed, rewrites the way in which agreements were constructed during that period. Another strong line points to the existence of detailed dossiers on political opponents and members of the business elite, not just intelligence reports, but complete files with histories, wiretaps, financial transactions, behind-the-scenes data, and hidden connections. Documents that, in the wrong hands, could destroy reputations in seconds. This theory is reinforced by former employees who mentioned, off the record, the existence of a media war room, where these materials were allegedly used as ammunition for strategic decisions. If true, these dossiers would represent more than informal espionage. They would be instruments of institutional blackmail. There are also those who believe that inside the safe, there would be physical evidence of agreements made between government and large corporations during emergency negotiations. For example, contracts signed outside conventional channels during the pandemic, when billions of dollars were moved in record time. Imagine discovering that certain companies received privileged information before public decisions, or that there were advance payments in exchange for political support or narrative control. A scandal of this kind would make any Watergate case look shallow, but the theories don't stop there. One of the most delicate involves the possibility of confidential recordings of highly sensitive meetings, made without the consent of the participants. Hidden cameras and microphones in moments of international crisis. Behind-the-scenes recordings of phone calls between global leaders, or even internal images of unrecorded meetings. The existence of this material would explain the reason for the construction of an isolated room, free from any external connection, tailor-made to store physical media that is impossible to track remotely. Some bolder analysts even suggest that the vault may contain operational maps of classified military actions, projects that not even Congress had full access to, intelligence strategies that would reveal temporary alliances with unrecognized international groups, operations carried out under a neutral flag in conflict zones, material that, if made public, would put lives, treaties, and the country's international image at risk. These are documents that carry not only information, but the responsibility for keeping entire power structures functioning. There is also evidence that physical evidence of the manipulation of electoral data, or the use of digital platforms for ideological targeting purposes, could be there. Not loose theories or social media screenshots, but internal reports, data service contracts, messages exchanged between analysts, screenshots of dashboards with real-time digital behavior tracking. A file like this would explain not only the safe, but the need to never let these papers enter the official archives. And in the midst of all this, one last chance arises. The most symbolic, perhaps. The one that the safe house is a personal logbook, a kind of record of what really happened at decisive moments, written by hand or dictated in private recordings. Accounts that do not follow the official script, but expose the intimate vision of power, with decisions, regrets, plans, and strategies not carried out. Not only to preserve, but to perhaps one day control the very narrative of history. All these hypotheses, even the boldest ones, have something in common: the need for absolute isolation. Because what is at stake is not just security, it is control of information. It is control over one's own political timeline. A safe like this is not just for hiding, it is for protecting versions. And this awareness changes everything. The fact that no one has access to the real content allows all these theories to remain alive. And perhaps that is the real purpose, to keep doubt as a weapon. Because as long as there is no confirmation, there is no proof. And as long as there is no proof, the advantage remains with whoever has the key. Comment here. That makes sense to me, if any of these hypotheses also resonated with you. Because each piece of this story seems less like a coincidence, and more like a message that there is something much bigger being carefully guarded, out of reach, out of the records, and perhaps out of control. Now I want to take this conversation to an even more sensitive point. Because up until now we have talked about indirect actions, suspicious movements, ambiguous statements, mysterious documents. But there is something even more powerful than all of this together: institutional silence. And it is this silence, calculated, firm, uncomfortable, that keeps the secret vault not only as a possibility, but as a constant presence between the lines of power. Since the government transition, the White House has never issued a note, a statement, or a simple denial about the existence of hidden rooms, secret reforms, or misappropriated files. Nothing. And when it comes to a matter of this magnitude, the lack of response is not carelessness, it is strategy. Imagine a new government taking control of the seat of the most influential executive branch on the planet. One of the first responsibilities, albeit behind the scenes, would be to review all the physical, digital, and strategic infrastructure left over from the previous government. This is when secrets usually come to light. This is when records don't add up, doors open, files appear where they shouldn't be. And, theoretically, if something so out of the ordinary had been identified, like a safe without official documentation, for example, the natural thing would be to issue a correction, a public statement, a minimal clarification. But none of that happened. The White House's silence on this issue is louder than any statement. Because in sensitive matters, what is not said becomes the framework for what one wants to hide. It is not just a matter of national security, it is a matter of image. Admitting the existence of a secret structure created by a previous president would imply opening a gigantic institutional breach. Acknowledging that there was a parallel management, a blind spot in the center of power, where decisions were made outside of state oversight. This is not just controversial. It is explosive. And what is most striking is that even journalists with direct access to the press office were ignored or redirected whenever they brought up the subject. At press conferences, the mere mention of unmapped structures generates glances among advisors and sudden changes in agenda. This has been happening since the first months of the new term. It is as if there was a silent agreement not to poke at this wound, a veiled consensus that the political cost of revealing this part of the story would be greater than the risk of leaving it forgotten. But here comes a factor that transforms this silence into something even more disturbing. It is not just a choice of communication. It seems to have been incorporated as a policy of continuity. The new government, faced with the structural legacy it left behind, chose not to touch, not to investigate, not to comment. And this omission, even if motivated by institutional stability, reinforces the mystery surrounding the safe. Because the more time passes without an answer, the more the void of explanation becomes part of the narrative. An unfilled silence begins to act as an indirect confirmation. And perhaps that is exactly what is happening now. If there was nothing there, why not just deny it? Why not display the documents, show the plans, open the library, show the public that there are no rooms other than those listed? A simple guided tour with official cameras would dismantle this whole story. But it doesn't happen. It didn't happen. And there is no prediction that this will happen. On the contrary, everything related to the subject is treated with a mixture of forced indifference and rehearsed caution, as if there were something that could not be denied, but that could not be explained either. And it is in this tension that the mystery grows, not because there is new evidence, but because there is a pattern of non-movement that is, in itself, revealing. The White House, with its entire security team, press aides, crisis management and strategic communications experts, knows exactly what it is doing. They know that the simple act of ignoring the issue preserves the necessary distance to avoid compromising itself, with the past, with the present, or with the possible consequences of a revelation. This type of stance opens the door to interpretations that go beyond the realm of traditional politics. It points to something much deeper: the existence of a code of silence that survives changes in power, a kind of invisible pact between administrations, where certain issues are neither Republican nor Democratic. They are untouchable. Issues that do not overlap, are not debated, are not investigated. And when a safe and physical or symbolic becomes part of this layer, it is not just a secret object. It becomes part of a culture, of an institutional mentality that has learned to live with gray areas. And this completely changes the way we understand what is being hidden. Because it's not just about the content, it's about the symbolic value of keeping content hidden. The White House's inaction doesn't just protect information. It protects the logic that not everything can be brought to light. And this logic, when accepted by successive governments, becomes one of the most dangerous pillars of public administration. Because it teaches that sometimes power is not exercised by those who speak, but by those who manage to keep their silence intact. Comment here. Silence also builds narratives. If you also feel that, the more time passes, the more the lack of answers begins to say exactly what no one had the courage to confirm out loud. Because there is silence that is not a lack of speech, it is choice. And every choice has a price. Now I want to provoke one last dive into this labyrinth, because after everything that has been revealed, or rather, after everything that has been avoided, the most uncomfortable question still stands, firm, like an elephant in the middle of the room that everyone pretends not to see. If this safe really exists, what else is still hidden inside the White House? And why is no one talking about it? This isn't just a locked room, a misappropriated file cabinet, or an unmarked safe. What's at stake here is much bigger. It's what this collective silence represents. It's what the White House's inaction, the FBI's hesitation, the calculated responses of former allies, and the altered blueprints hide. Each piece, no matter how discreet, points to a pattern. And that pattern reveals a profound shift in how power is wielded and protected. The safe, in this context, is no longer an object. It becomes a symbol, a point of convergence between everything that is done in the dark and everything that is avoided in public. It represents the space where power feels naked, where the truth cannot circulate freely, where decisions are kept as if they were relics too dangerous for democratic debate. The existence of this structure, even without direct confirmation, has already caused a rupture, because the simple fact that it is plausible and supported by so many concrete elements shows that there is a part of the government that operates by its own codes, by unwritten rules, by silent pacts. And this raises an even more delicate question. If a secret vault can be created, maintained, shielded, and then silenced by successive governments, what else can be done without the public knowing? If structures can be erased from maps, if contracts can be hidden by special clauses, if rooms can disappear from official discourse, then the truth is being stacked and locked away, one layer on top of another, while on the outside, we continue to believe that everything is under control. The hidden truth is not just what is inside, it is why it is being kept from the surface. What is being sought to hide is not just the content, but the impact it would have if it were revealed. And perhaps this is the most dangerous point, to understand that somewhere inside the White House, there may be a collection of secrets that were not erased by chance, but preserved with method, engineered with intention, protected with a silence that spans administrations, parties, and ideologies. Think about it. What is scarier? A confidential document leaking, or the certainty that there are dozens of documents that will never even be mentioned. Because the biggest risk is not in something leaking. It is in everything that will never leak. Everything that is locked away inside and that in some way shapes decisions, influences speeches, manipulates alliances, and the fact that we have never seen this content only confirms how important it is. It's as if we were walking through the hallways of a house that seems safe, well lit, democratic, but that, in the dark corners, holds doors that cannot be opened. And perhaps that is precisely why no one wants to talk about the safe. Because opening up about this subject would require rewriting not only recent history, but the way we understand how power works. And the system, regardless of the party, is not ready to deal with this reconfiguration. It is not ready to deal with the full truth. But truth has a curious way of resisting. Even when it is locked away, even when it is denied, even when it is buried by bureaucracy and silence, it pulsates, it reappears in fragments, in evasive interviews, in altered plans, in misplaced documents, in eyes that look away, in answers that never come. Truth, even hidden, still finds a way to be felt. And in this case, what we feel is that the safe is not fiction. It is the missing piece that connects all the dots. It is the absence that confirms the presence. Write in the comments. The truth is still locked away. If you also feel like something has been hidden, not just for safety, but by choice. Because sometimes, what's behind the door is too big to let out. And yet, we keep hearing the echoes of what was left inside. If you've come this far, it's because this story has touched you in some way. And I know that when something moves you like this, it's because there's something inside you that wants an answer. So, if this content has given you value, clarity, or at least that feeling that someone is finally saying what no one is saying, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Because that's what I do here. Connect dots, ask the right questions, and shed light where most people prefer to leave it dark. And since you stayed with me until the end of this journey, leave a comment with the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know who really felt the weight and value of each part of this conversation. That helps a lot more than you can imagine. Oh, and if this video made you think differently, made you see the scenario with different eyes, leave a like too. We build this connection together, and each gesture of yours here strengthens this space for reflection, questioning, and above all, the search for truth. There is a video here that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there. Because the story is not over yet.